the people would need to protect themselves against a tyrannical government. And that was something that was in there as a kind of last resort, right? Because it's pretty extraordinary when you think about it. If you rise up and use arms against the government, then you're really declaring revolution. And so it is extraordinary to see how that idea had been sort of lying dormant there in the Constitution for some time and then gets activated in the 1970s by the National Rifle Association and becomes completely imbued with the culture wars of the day, and ever since then has only gotten worse. And what gets projected onto this new Second Amendment, this idea of individual rights, in an extraordinary way really does illustrate what we were just talking about the difference between civil rights and civil liberties. Instead of talking in terms of groups of people being oppressed by a major force such as the government, we're now talking about individuals saying, I need to have a gun in every circumstance so that I can defend myself against every other citizen, not the government, which has more power than me, but my fellow citizens that I fear and hate. So that has been quite a turn. And it's one thing to move that way as a policy, to have a group of people in society who have different views, let's say, from the mainstream about how many weapons one should have or what self-defense looks like. But to constitutionalize it the way that the NRA has is really kind of extraordinary, because it now carries with it the weight of, do you hate the Founding Fathers or don't you, right? If you don't want me to have my AR-10 in this schoolyard, then you hate the Constitution. That is really a very chilling move. And the NRA is almost single-handedly responsible for that. And of course, the Supreme Court helped in Heller, but didn't go as far, I think, as the NRA certainly would have wanted, but certainly put it on the table to say, we are now definitively going to say that the Second Amendment is about this individual right to self-defense through guns. And none of that actually makes sense, whether it's the individual part or the guns part or the self-defense part, because that's not in the text and it's not in the history. But now we're all living in the world that the NRA has helped create, which is that is what the Constitution tells us. And instead of thinking, as we often, I think about the Bill of Rights as this kind of check on the government power, it's this kind of affirmative, positive sort of force where we get to pass all these laws that say you have to allow guns everywhere. So it's not this limitation on the government. It's actually a positive right on the part of the people to say, I want what I want everywhere. And it doesn't matter whose welfare I happen to risk when I get the thing that I want. So that is something that I think is remarkable and unfortunately has been, I think, echoed now in First Amendment and other civil liberties approaches. But that is really something extraordinary to see, is that constitutionalization of a very idiosyncratic view of what the Second Amendment could be, that then becomes, it's almost circular, right? It starts out as a kind of populist sort of idea of what the Second Amendment should look like. It gets constitutionalized and then it gets sort of repopularized. And so people who don't care anything about the Constitution or about history are really sure that the Second Amendment gives them the right to have guns wherever they want. And it becomes a mantra for certain groups in society. So it is not just happening on the sanctified Supreme Court level, but it's really at the level of the general population. And because it's guns as opposed to something else, it is something that we are all having to live with and all of us are being endangered by, because people's view of what it means to be faithful to the Constitution in this sense means have as many guns as possible and no restrictions on them anywhere.
And this goes to a little bit to your pucks on both houses worldview, because I think in fairness, it was progressive legal scholars who were pushing the idea of an individual right to bear arms. I mean, it was certainly growing in steam over the decades, but I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but part of it was when progressive legal scholars jumped into the debate on the side of individual rights, making exactly the claims you just advanced, which is, look, if we believe in a robust First Amendment, we have to believe in an equally robust Second Amendment. That wasn't coming from the political right. That was coming from the Progressive Legal Academy as well. And I think it goes to, sort of your arguments about how in the First Amendment sphere, we have the same problem, which is if we use that as the benchmark, that we have to have almost unfettered First Amendment rights, then pushing the boundaries of what Second Amendment rights looks like fairness, right? That looks like parity.
I think that's right. There is a fascinating convergence, as you say,